Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Humans Are Cryptids, written by JohnGaldt. Snip sprinted home, hugging the walls and pushing through the crowd, before slamming the door and blocking out some of the screaming alarms outside. Her brothers and parents' go-bags were gone. They were already on their way to the escape shuttles. "Thank the protectors," she said. Her hands dove into her pockets, grabbing the junk that she had found and dumping it into the box entirely on instinct, which was stupid. This was the last time that she would be here. She shouldered her bag while staring at the box, ready to charge out and join the flowing crowd, but she couldn't pull her mind off of the pile of junk. She would take a few and trade them for a story from their local cryptid. She would offer him spokes and wire, small motors and broken calculators, and he would tell her of dragons and wizards while feeding the birds. Stories of a lone warrior standing against evil. The station wouldn't be here, so it was her last chance. She lifted the whole box and heaved it up to her chest, running through her door and leaving it open behind her. She jogged along, trying to match the crowd's pace, her eyes wide and filled with fear. The Salnard stopped thinking on their own, turning into a panicked fluid that washed through the corridors and upstairs, rising through the floors to the docking ports on the innermost floor. She heard the occasional scream, someone losing their footing and vanishing down. She started to run over the dropped bags, climbing over discarded items and trash. The whole box rattled and weighed heavily as she worked her way to the right side of the flow, rising up a final ramp and pushing away. She looked up, seeing the inside of the drum above and all around her. People were running all around the inside, pushing towards the docks. The crowd rose from another ramp and came towards her. She braced herself, her shoulders pulling in tight, hugging the box tightly to her chest. She crashed into them, her bag wrenching hard on her shoulder. She managed to hold her ground, like a rock against a wave. The strap on her bag snapped, and it was all whisked away in the crowd. She couldn't go after it. She needed to get to the park. Explosions rang out on the far end of the drum, smoke rising and rushing clockwards, swirling around and down the length of the station, accelerated into a cone of black choking air. The crowd rose up in front of her. She braced her legs, but it washed up around. The box was slammed into her chest, knocking the wind out of her. It tilted to the side, junk falling out to clatter across the floor. Snip winced. She needed those parts. She kept her head low as her legs gave out, watching scraps get kicked away as the crowd began to bury her into the new floor of bags and dropped luggage. A foot stepped on her, and then another. She was sinking, pulled under by the march of escaping Salnards. She should have left. She should have gone to the transport. What would Merlin have done? Inigo Montoya, Shrek, Theseus? She pulled in a deep breath and let it out as a roar. Not a scream of panic, but a threat. She forced her shaking legs up and rose through the crowd, pushing forward and out into the other side. She ran until her legs began to give out, her feet trampling the overturned earth of the park, running past the statues of soldiers who used to protect them, soldiers who were gone now. He stood. She had rarely seen him standing when his full height was terrifying. He was wide as he was tall, a great moving mass of shredded cloth and dozens of black toads. She slowed to a walk, panting hard and coming around to his front, seeing his eyes poking out from under his thick hood. His eyes were scanning the invaders. He wasn't a Salnard. He was something else, but nobody knew what. He had thin, long, dexterous fingers and a massive body. He looked human, but he was far too big and wrinkly. Snip raised her box up high. It stole his attention, drawing it down to the glittering crap that she had collected over the months. Then, his eyes running up to her face and softened. "Snip, you should be on the transport," he said.
"You should too. Why haven't you left?"
she scowled. He looked down at her box. "This isn't a time for a story," he said.
"You can stop them, can't you?"
she said. "I'm not a wizard, Snip, and there are too many of them," he said.
"I'm staying here. Physic wouldn't run. He would stop them," she said.
She dumped the box's contents onto the grass to mix with the other screws and scattered circuits. His eyes tracked the parts and then ran down to his side. His walking stick came out under the bundles of cloth. It was long and metallic. His hand gripped around the handle, tugging the butt against his shoulder and gripping it halfway down the length with the other hand. He put his eye on the broken telescope on top. Then he shook his head. "It doesn't work anymore," he said, while running his eyes down its rusted length. His eyes searched us, then rose up at the soldiers that poured into the far side of the drum. They fired shots into the air, threw grenades into the shops and down the ramps of the first floor.
What would a wizard do? A knight, a soldier?
She shouted while throwing her hands against his chest. They sunk straight into the tattered clothes, but it felt like she was jamming her hands into wire. She flinched back when the strange mechanical flesh moved around him. There was a flapping motion and the clothes started to writhe.
Nah, I only want one more story. One where I don't have to leave home,
she said. "Just one more story," he said. She nodded. His head fell back, letting out a loud laugh. It was wrong and cruel, nothing like the laughs that she'd heard from him before. It was sharp, repeated ahs, while he lifted his cane. His clothes began to swarm, little wings of cloth and wire flapping about him as the faces of mechanical crows poked out. Little beady gem-like eyes staring at her and cawing along with him in a rising cacophony. It echoed around the drum as crows rose up from bins and rooftops, all of them taking to the air. He exploded into a cloud of black, flapping wings. She ducked down, covering her face as they scattered, swarming around him in a storm of shrieking metal and screaming beaks. A gangly, thin figure stood over her, ropey muscles putting taut over gnawed bone. He had black ports and armor anchor points down on his skin. He was human. He was one of the soldiers, the statues of old protectors. He had to be centuries old. He raised his cane, swirling it above his head, rolling it in the same direction as the storm. He swung it like a staff and pointed its length down the drum, like he was casting a spell. But nothing happened. Nothing immediate. But Snip saw the bird's flow changing direction and rushing out to where he pointed. It moved like a black cloud, swarming towards the soldiers. He swung and caught, his cane sweeping slowly across the drum, and the crows following up the walls and through the soldiers. She heard an explosion, and another, little pops of flame in the cloud as it moved through the soldiers, who began firing in all directions. Snip kept her head down, but she couldn't look away. Wherever the crows flew, there was nothing left. No soldiers, just their equipment and small fires. His face was all concentration, eyes sharp and snapping from one sight to the next. Something fell down beside Snip, a small metal clip. There was another and another, as the crows flew overhead and began to rain down small metal clips, all exactly the same shape. She looked up to see the soldier were gone, all of them. One man against an army. He knelt down, his arms falling slack against his sides. He scooped up one of the pins and dropped it into her palm. "I am not a wizard. It's just a trick," he said. It was a grenade pin. Snip's hands closed tight over it, looking at the fires and empty streets, or the crows pecking at pieces of flesh that lay scattered in their wake. It was true. All the stories were true. End. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Vitmori, Terran on Air, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Lightsjock, Dragzoon WRE, Lord Azrakal, and Arcadian. Thank you.